Set in ancient times, when humans did not yet know technology, there was an inland tribe called the Maori. For more than 500 years, they fought using traditional bladed weapons. But in the 1800s, they finally obtained rifles, the modern weapons brought by foreign invaders from the developed country. In 1830, in the Tasman Sea, a priest was sailing with sailors. That night, there was quite a big storm, causing one of the ship's crew to die. The next morning, the captain and the crew of the ship paid their last respects for one of the crew who died. As a priest, Thomas was asked to say a prayer before they released the body to the sea. Thomas had a hobby of documenting interesting things he had just seen. However, at that time, cameras were not yet found. Thomas only used paper and pencil to paint the objects which he thinks are unique and interesting. At that moment, Thomas drew one of the ship's crew, Yunuku, an indigenous Maori people. The captain thought that Yunuku's parents were tribal leaders from one of the inland Maori tribes, and Yunuku was deliberately entrusted to the captain to be trained in seafaring skills. Not long after, they arrived on a large island, inhabited by one of the Maori tribes. The captain decided to anchor for a while, after realizing there was a part of the ship which had to be repaired. While the others went to land using a boat, Thomas instead rode his white horse which almost drowned. But this actually amazed the captain and his crew to see unique things that Thomas did. The captain and the others were busy looking for wood, but Thomas was wandering around the forest, until finally he accidentally met a woman named Ranjimai, an indigenous Maori people. She slowly came closer, then stroked Thomas's horse's head. But suddenly, Ranjimai's husband came and the captain also approached them. The captain immediately explained in Maori language about their purpose in entering this forest. The ship would be finished tomorrow, so they intended to return to the ship and stay there for one night. However, Thomas said that he wanted to get to know this new environment, so he asked permission to camp on land. The captain, who was paid and assigned to accompany Thomas to his destination safely, forbade Thomas to do that, on the grounds that it was too dangerous if he was alone in the forest. But because Thomas insisted, the captain couldn't do anything. Alone, Thomas returned to the forest and lay down, enjoying the beautiful view and the very calming breeze. But suddenly, Thomas woke up because of a noise. Turns out there was a war going on between Maori tribes from different areas. One of the chieftains was Akatariwa, and he was Yunuku's father. Akatariwa wanted to seize the land belonging to Ranjimai and her tribes, so he would slaughter them all. Seeing violence before his eyes, Thomas felt that he needed to stop this barbarity. When the captain came, Thomas made a deal with Akatariwa, trading his horse in return for Ranjimai and her husband's life. However, because the horse was only one, Thomas could only save one life, it's Ranjimai's life, while her husband was immediately executed at that moment. Thomas then took Ranjimai with him, going to his destination. Ranjimai was treated very well, not like a slave. Even Thomas gave her his bed, even though Ranjimai chose to sleep on the floor. Shortly, they arrived at their destination island. Thomas was greeted by local people, and they were British who had lived here for a long time. Thomas came to this place because of their request, because they needed a priest to fulfill their spiritual needs. Thomas then found that Ranjimai had a fever due to a wound from yesterday's incident. So when he was having dinner with the elders, he asked the only doctor in this place to treat her. However, the doctor refused on the grounds that the stock of medicine they have was very limited. In the end, Thomas realized that the British didn't really like the Maori or other races that were different from them. However, they didn't realize that they were occupying land that actually belonged to the Maori people, so they're the colonialists and ignorant people. Even though the doctor refused to help Ranjimai, luckily, there was one villager named Charlotte who sincerely treated Ranjimai sincerely, making Thomas relieved and grateful. One day, the village bell rang, signaling the arrival of the Maori tribe, led by Ranjimai's father. He brought 3 people from different sub-districts, and they were Akatariwa's troops who were suspected of being involved in the massacre the other day. After Ranjimai's father killed the 3 of them, he talked to Charlotte, who was really good at speaking the Maori language. He asked permission for his daughter to stay here, asking for guidance from Thomas so that he would teach her the religion and manners. Ranjimai's father also sent one of his youngest men, Tol, to accompany and look after Ranjimai in this place. The next day, Thomas was in the church, carrying out his duties as a priest, accompanied by Ranjimai and Tol. When the villagers were praying, led by Thomas, Ranjimai and Tol just kept quiet, seeing activities they had never seen before. Shortly, when they were going home and past the villagers' houses, Tol smiled and secretly had a crush on a girl named Bethany, and it seemed that she also had the same feelings. Thomas then invited Ranjimai and Tol to stop by to the grocery store, and it was the only one in this area. Sadly, the shop owner was very well known as indifferent to neighbors, because he only cared about his small businesses. Of the many British people there, it seems that Thomas and Charlotte were the only ones who never differentiate between race, ethnicity, and skin color. It was proven when Charlotte happily taught Ranjamai a modern dance. That afternoon, when Thomas was cleaning up the church, the elders came to him, wanting to convey an important message so that Thomas would not involve the Maori tribe in their worship activities. But Thomas remained in his principle of wanting to treat every human being equally, and not make any distinctions. That evening, when all the villagers were gathering and dancing together, Bethany secretly went out alone to meet Tal in the church. They really fell in love at the first sight, and were determined to do forbidden things in the church. While in another place, Charlotte has finished dressing Ranjamai, after Ranjamai told her wish to join in dancing with other villagers. Arriving at the location, Ranjamai immediately asked Thomas to dance, asking him to be her dancing partner. After dancing, Thomas and Ranjamai immediately went home, but Ranjamai was shocked when she saw that Toll had died in the church. It seemed like he was killed by Bethany's family, who did not like their relationship. The next morning, Thomas was shocked to hear the news that the people were taking the law into their own hands, beating the shop owner to a pulp. They accused the shop owner of being the suspect who murdered Tal, but in fact Thomas knew that the shop owner was only being used as a scapegoat by Bethany's family. Thomas did not want any misunderstandings between the villagers that could cause division, so he intended to go to the forest to return Tal's body to his tribe. Bethany felt guilty for Tal's death, so she gave her horse so that Thomas could quickly reach his destination. Charlotte and Ranjamai accompanied Thomas, and their intentions were opposed by the elders. However, Thomas remained true to his intentions, not wanting to cause misunderstandings between the two parties. They traveled for 2 days and finally arrived at their destination at Ranjamai's hometown. There, Thomas and Charlotte had to explain carefully the cause of Tal's death so that the elders there would not misunderstand this problem. Luckily, the chieftain was willing to understand. Even Thomas and Charlotte were allowed to stay here for a few days. They were also welcome to learn about their culture, the culture of the Maori tribe. The next morning, Thomas was painting the king who was having breakfast. Because he was the king, the way he eats is different from most ordinary people. He has to be fed using a wooden stick, and this has become a tradition in the Maori tribe. Not long after, Thomas heard the sound of gunshots coming from the forest, so he quickly went to check and left his book. Curious about what Thomas had done earlier, the king asked his people to get the book. Seeing the book, he was really shocked when he saw sadistic images, but he didn't know what the meaning was. Meanwhile, Thomas had arrived at the location, and it was a shooting training ground. The Maori people got these firearms from colonialists, and the citizens of advanced civilizations bartered for natural resources. Thomas actually felt sorry, but he ended up teaching them how to load and shoot properly, making Ranjamai ask him to teach everyone. That night, Thomas and Charlotte were asked to meet the king, talking about Thomas' book, which contains sadistic images. The king just wanted to ask Thomas for clarification regarding where and when he made the pictures. Thomas actually didn't want to tell the truth, but because he had no other choice, he was forced to be honest that in the past, he used to be the cruelest soldier in his battalion. He not only killed enemy soldiers, but also women and children, until he finally found a turning point in his life and decided to become a priest who wanted to spread goodness and peace. The king was a wise man, so he thought Thomas was making redemption by spreading goodness and peace. This should be appreciated, because what he did was a form of regret for his actions in the past. The next morning, Thomas was surprised to see the captain and his crew carrying a consignment of firearms. They exchanged these weapons for the tribe's natural resources like livestock, food, clothing, and other natural resources, which are very valuable. The Maori people did not realize that the firearms have caused war between tribes, including the incident that killed Ranjamai's husband. With good intentions, Thomas wanted to stop the dispute between the two tribes. Therefore, Thomas was determined to go to Ekatarua's territory and speak to him, as long as the king was willing to make peace with Ekatarua, and there would be no more bloodshed between the two tribes. As the representatives of the king, Ranjamai's father also said that they were ready to follow the religious teachings brought by Thomas if he really could make the two tribes reconcile. So this is a strong motivation for Thomas to be able to make this happen. Long story short, Thomas boards the captain's ship, and the captain was also going to meet Ekatarua to offer them the firearms. However, Thomas was surprised because it turns out Ranjamai was secretly on board the ship in order to avenge her husband's death. When Thomas and the captain arrived in Ekatarua's territory, Yunuku immediately greeted them because he's Akataruwa's son. They were guided to the main base of Akataruwa's tribe, which was located in the hills. Arriving there, Thomas was invited first to enter the hut because he was considered an honorable man. So without talking much, Thomas immediately stated that his intention to come here was as a representative of the king's tribe. The king wanted to make peace with Akataruwa and his tribe, so as a form of sincerity, Thomas handed a gift from the king for Akataruwa. It was a traditional weapon which is considered a valuable object in the Maori. However, Akataruwa still wanted war because he thought that's the only way to achieve peace, so Thomas finally had to go home without getting any good results. When Thomas was approaching his horse, Akataruwa met the captain who intended to offer his firearms, but the price was increasing as the one firearm was equivalent to 15 pigs and 200 baskets of potatoes. This made Akataruwa annoyed and immediately killed the captain and all his crew. Because of this, Thomas, who should have gone home, was instead attacked. Luckily, Ranjime came on time and managed to save his life. This incident was an opportunity for Akataruwa to raid the king's tribe, where they took over the captain's ship, which was equipped with cannons and various other modern weapons. Just as Akataruwa and his troops were on their way, Thomas and Ranjime quickly traveled overland to warn the king, and after one day of traveling overland, Thomas and Ranjime arrived there. So without thinking twice, the king immediately mobilized his troops to prepare for a big war. Not long after, when the preparations were finished, Akataruwa and his troops appeared, coming with great enthusiasm, and they even did a typical dance before going to war as part of the tradition. The civil war broke out between two camps. Even though they were still one homeland, they used guns as their main weapon, so a very big war actually happened. The battle was very fast, less than 30 minutes, due to the Akataruwa's lack of knowledge of war strategy. So it is clear this war was won by the king's tribe, who got help from Thomas, a former soldier, who used a smoke strategy to minimize casualties. When the war was about to end, Charlotte had to die from being shot. Seeing his closest friend die, the brutality within Thomas emerged, making him blindly kill his enemies. In the end, only Akataruwa and his son, Wenduku, were able to survive. When Ranjime's father put down his weapon as a sign of an invitation for peace, Akataruwa remained on his strong principle of dying as a chieftain, so Ranjime's father was forced to finish him. Ranjime was feeling sorry for Wenduku, asking her father to forgive him, and inviting him to make peace. They unite with each other as a form of love and brotherhood. 4 years passed, Ranjime and Wenduku finally got married and officially united the two different sub-district tribes into one. Even now, Wenduku became the new king of the Maori tribe, and he was respected by everyone on this island. On that day, they had a guest who was the general of the British envoy. They came here to make new agreements in terms of export and import trade. The general wanted to establish a tax and customs center, so that trade could be controlled and supervised. But because this is the land of the Maori tribe, Wenduku, with the help of his new advisor Thomas, refused the deal, unless there were benefits for both parties.